Oops, were you live or not?
You're live.
Hi, everyone. We're still a few moments early, or actually, it's almost right on 7 o'clock. Woo! 8 people. Hee. Anyway, hi, everyone. I hope you've had a restful spring break. However, it didn't end the way we expected it. This semester has not come out at all the way we expected it. So if you will kindly be patient with us, because we're learning how to put this online. We were able to get it going for my earlier class, and it was pretty good. We had 21 people watching at one point. This is a very long class, and it's a very long lecture, and I don't think we all want to be here that long. What I'll do is start this lecture. This lecture, chapter 7, I do have on videotape, so I can put that up, but I will start the lecture and we can get it going. And then when we start to fade out, then I'll have that other video ready for you. But at this point, we all need to be a little bit more kind to ourselves. Life is crazy. I understand that. If you have questions, go ahead and throw them up on the live chat if you can, or send them to me by email, except I'm not looking at email in real time. Note to self, get fewer crunchy snacks. My husband is our technical director tonight. Hi, Jerry. He's waving, but he's also munching on carrots, so I gotta get quiet snacks next time. Anyway, don't touch the face. I hope you're all well, and I will get started on this. Unless anyone's got some pressing questions. I know you might have some questions about the assignment coming out on the Canterbury Tales, and I will answer those at the end of this feed, or what I might do is have an extra student hour that we can interact live with, or you can send me emails. You can always get a hold of me by emails. But let's go on to chapter 7, Rome's 3 heirs. This is kind of a weird chapter because we're going to be talking about 3 different civilizations that arise out of the Roman Empire. 2 of those civilizations are going to claim they are the Roman Empire, and the third one will not have any relationship to the Roman Empire at all, except they act in an expansive way like the Roman Empire did. So when they talk about, Rome's 3 heirs, they're talking about 3 different civilizations. So let's get on it. So no, we're fine. So the first group we're going to be talking about is the Byzantine Empire. That's an empire we haven't talked about yet. The second group will be the Islamic dynasties that are going to grow after the life of Muhammad, and then the third will be the Western European territories. The one thing much of these areas, 2 of the 3 areas, have in common is, of course, Christianity. The Roman Empire had become Christian soon after Constantine, and it will remain Christian. But it will be centered in different places. Now, we know a lot about little bits of this history because we've had people like the Venerable Bede. So he was a monk in England who was writing a lot of these things down. He was familiar with a lot of the ancient Roman texts. So he understood the Roman Empire and what was happening there. But he also knew his own time was very different, and those Roman ideals had to be switched in order to fit these new needs of a new time. Now, the period we're starting into is the early Middle Ages, or the early medieval period. Both words mean the same thing. Uh, they didn't think of themselves as medieval at that time. They thought of themselves as themselves. They didn't think of themselves as medieval in any way. That's a classification that we give them, that we look back and we give them. However, we do know that what happened then is going to help to form our own time. So it's really a formative time. It used to be they taught this time as being the Dark Ages. And I hope to dissuade you of it because it wasn't that dark. People were doing some incredible things, uh, traveling, creating works of art, building societies. So to call it a dark age is really not accurate. It's playing down what this age really was. Because a lot of these people in this age had to start from the very bottom, so from base subsistence, and work their way up. So these three civilizations I'm talking about tonight are the New Rome of Byzantium, Islam, and the Western European territories. Wrong mouse. All right. The Byzantine Empire was, of course, the Roman Empire. The city that Constantine built and named after himself, Constantinople, was a city that was built on an older city called Byzantium. And so consequently, historians have used that term Byzantine to describe this later Roman Empire. They thought of themselves as Romans. They considered themselves Romans, Roman citizens, direct descendants of all of the Roman emperors. In fact, their structure will be the Roman Empire. They will have an emperor. They will have a senate, but they will also have a Pontifex Maximus. And it will be Christian in orientation, excuse me. And in Byzantium, the emperor and the Pontifex Maximus were almost co-equal rulers, although the emperor took care of the legislative, judicial, and executive branch, and the Pontifex Maximus, the head of the church, took care of the sacred duties. But they were very close to each other, and their lives were very much intertwined. I want to talk a little bit about at least one or two of these emperors to give you a taste of what these men were like. One was Justinian. He was a very ambitious emperor. He's living around in the 6th century CE. He wanted to recreate the Roman Empire at its height, the huge Roman Empire. Remember, much of that had fallen into kind of basically being run by a whole bunch of different people. It wasn't the Roman Empire as we had known it under Caesar Augustus. It was a very different creature. And so Justinian is going to send out his best general, a fellow by the name of Belisarius, to recreate the Roman Empire and do it under military efforts. And so Belisarius is going to take an army and invade North Africa, Spain, and the Italian peninsula, trying to recreate this giant empire that the Romans used to have and put it under the control of Justinian back in Constantinople. Those efforts I'll talk about in a second, but unfortunately, those efforts had to be curtailed by problems at home. However, another thing Justinian was very popular for and very well known for was codifying Roman law. Here's the thing. Roman law had been around since the 8th century BCE. It was now the 6th century CE. We're talking about 1400 years where these laws had just piled up. Every new emperor that came along, decrees, rules, uh, doctrines, all of these things had piled up to the point at which they are self-contradicting. That something that was legal in the old Roman Republic is now illegal in the new Roman Empire. Very confusing. Justinian is going to bring about a committee to go through all of the laws, throw out the ones they considered poor or contradictory, and create a catalog of laws that was easier to search through. I mean, imagine not knowing, not having any law titles or anything. You probably had to know what emperor wrote it and when he wrote it in order to find the law. It would have been a nightmare. And so it's going to be up to Justinian and his committee to make sense of this. And what they're going to do is create the Corpus Juris Civilis, which is going to not only get rid of all of the junky laws, but also coordinate them in such a way that they're easy to search, they're easy to build upon. This system is going to be the system that's going to be adopted by many nations in modern times. That Corpus Juris Civilis is a basis for organizing our laws. So it's extremely important. So I've got a nice picture of Justinian here, if we can go to it. And you are going to see some real differences between the old Roman emperors and their busts and statues and this new style of Roman emperor. This artwork is called a mosaic. It's little teeny tiny colored stones that are arranged in the old Roman times and ancient Roman times. Oftentimes they made floors this way because the stones are heavy. It would be very heavy to put on a wall, but they made great flooring. And many of these floors from ancient Rome are still available. Archaeologists are still finding them buried underneath sand and dirt and everything. But this is, I don't know exactly where this mosaic is, but it is of Justinian. You can see him in the middle, but unlike the old Roman emperors, he's wearing a crown. This is very different. Romans, remember, hated the monarchy. They didn't want to have anything to do with it, but now it becomes obvious this is a monarch. This is an emperor, Emperor Justinian. However, his clothes are very different than the old Roman. They're robes, yes, but not the same togas. Also, look at the people surrounding Justinian. They are not military. They are, on one side, he has churchmen. You can tell by their haircut. They have what's called a tonsure, Tonsure. Why anyone would want this kind of haircut, I have no idea. But you shaved the crown of your hair and left a circle of hair around it. And that was basically how you could tell a churchman from almost anyone else, except if they're wearing a hat. On the other side of him are men who are obviously legislators. They are men who are there to, nope, the other side. They are men who are there to write laws. You see the military, yes, but they are way over in the corner. They're not as important as the legislators and the members of the church. So you can see they're a very different value system for Justinian. So, under Belisarius, Justinian is going to try to recreate that old Roman Empire. And you can see it in this map on the green. And it made a good stab of it. Egypt, North Africa, a little bit in the south of Spain, and the Italian peninsula. However, in doing so, they created havoc by trying to take these towns, and it's going to be far more detrimental. Also, they're going to want taxes from all these people. They're going to be asking these people to pay their fair share, but they are so far away from Constantinople, there's very little that an emperor can do on a day-to-day basis that these people would see or even recognize. So, taxation without representation, as it were. So, trying to recreate this Roman Empire, the impact it had on the Italian peninsula is that Belisarius had to do far more damage to take over the Italian peninsula than was really worthwhile. All of the infrastructure that had started to crumble, Belisarius just ruins it. Cuts aqueducts, cuts irrigation, all of these nifty things that the Romans had built up, the Romans are going to destroy. And so it's not going to be a successful takeover of Italy. They're going to lose Italy quite soon after that. North Africa will remain in imperial hands for a while, but they're going to lose that as well. And in fact, there's going to be another group that comes in. The Islamic dynasties are going to come in, and the people of North Africa are going to welcome them as liberators. Oh, I'll get to that. And in Spain, they're going to have to do quite a bit of fighting. Excuse me. Seasonal allergies, I promise you. Anyway, in Spain, they're going to be fighting as well and not be able to keep up their control. Because here's the thing. To the Byzantine Empire, one place must be protected above all, and that's Constantinople. Absolutely. Nothing can harm Constantinople. So when a problem starts building in Constantinople, the army is going to come back. One of the problems that's going to affect Justinian's rule, most famously, is a plague. He's going to have what we think was the bubonic plague go through his empire and decimate it and cause a lot of havoc. And so that's one reason the army has to come back. So the army went out, did a whole bunch of damage, but now it's got to come back to protect Constantinople. Also, there's going to be quite a bit of unrest. Part of that is because of famine, part of that is because of plague, and part of that is because of sports. Under Justinian, they kept some of the old Roman sports. Now, not the Greek Olympics, and certainly not the gladiators, because they were too closely reminiscent of the persecution of the Christians. But chariot races were all the rage, that they built huge stadiums and filled them with different crowds that were cheering on their favorite chariot racing team. Think NASCAR, but with horses. And you kind of get the idea. And the two teams that were the most popular were the Greens and the Blues. They just called themselves the Greens and the Blues. And they had riots in which many, many people were killed over these stupid chariot races. So Constantinople was not a peaceful time between all of these things happening. But they will importantly see themselves as the inheritors of the Roman Empire. They will see themselves as Romans, period. But they will be challenged out from outside by the Persians. Yeah, the Persians are still hanging around. They're still there on the eastern part of the what we now know as the Middle East, places like Iran and Iraq. They're still there, hanging on and threatening. And there's going to be a new group, the Muslims. Islam will be growing after 630 CE. And then they're going to, by 650, be reclaiming much of what the Persians had ruled and much of what the Byzantines had ruled. And in fact, they will be taking Jerusalem away from the Byzantine Empire. So they're going to make a quite a bit of noise when they come along. But around the 8th century CE, we're going to see a very different controversy happen in the Roman, in Byzantium. I can keep up. There are Romans, so I'm not wrong, but in Byzantium. And that is the questions of orthodoxy. Remember, the Greek word orthodoxy means straight thinking. Orthopedists. So straight thinking is the ideas of the church, the doctrine and the dogmas and the rules that everyone was to follow in the church. And of course, the church is very closely aligned with the emperor. So the church rules and doctrine and dogma and orthodoxy is intertwined with the politics as well. So it was a bigger game than we're used to thinking about when it comes to religion. The emperors are in these debates, discussions, and this creation of these rules. One of the most important thing that's going to happen around the 8th century is going to be what's called the iconoclastic controversy. The icon for the images and clastic for breakers. These people are known as the image breakers or the iconoclasts. We use that term for someone who doesn't fit in well, but really it means image breakers. So icons at this time, and then now even in modern times for the Orthodox Church, are not just paintings. They're very special paintings. They represent holy people, men, women, some deceased, some could be still alive. In the Orthodox Church, you could be a holy person and still be alive. And they are specially done paintings, usually on a portable board. And there is an extreme amount of ritual in creating these paintings. And then they are covered often with jewels, often with gold, and they are kept sometimes displayed, or sometimes only brought out during special times and used in special rituals. They're not just paintings. They are something that are very closely identified with the churches they're in and with the Orthodox religion. But there will be others in the hierarchy of the church who will be looking at Scripture, especially the Old Testament, and say, wait a minute, there are injunctions against graven images. Aren't these icons graven images? And that's going to create a huge controversy within the Byzantine Empire. There will be traditionalists who want to keep the icons because they are aids to worship. They are not themselves worshipped. They are aids to worship because they reflect holy people in their perfection, as if it's been described to me as if they are looking down from heaven through a window, and the icon is that window. And then their opponents were saying, but it's a graven image, and the Bible says we cannot have that. And so this is going to create a very big argument within the Orthodox Church. And in fact, the Emperor Leo III is going to be part of this iconoclastic controversy. Some historians think he even started it, partially because he's watching the growth of Islam And in the Islamic tradition, images of people are not used. And so that injunction against graven images is even stronger to Muslims. And so Leo is going to look at these icons as perhaps something that shouldn't be around. So it's going to create a considerable clash between the emperor and certain members of his Orthodox community and the monasteries, many of whom had these icons and wanted to keep them. Now, this is going to be resolved in the 8th century, but it's going to take quite a long time. There's going to be a lot of art destroyed. The iconoclasts are not just arguing against these graven images, they are destroying them. They are taking them out and burning them, or chiseling them, or chopping artwork off the wall, or breaking statues. And this is going to start to open up the divide between the East and the West, the divide between the Greek Orthodox Church, centered in Constantinople, and then eventually the Western Church, which will become the Roman Catholic Church, centered in Rome. So the schism is going to start breaking apart through this iconoclastic controversy. But once this iconoclastic controversy is over, there will be a renewed interest in orthodoxy, what is correct, and consequently a real fear of unorthodox thinking or heretical thinking. It's going to be an important part of how the Byzantine Empire is going to go forward. The Byzantine Empire we can think of as Greek-speaking Christians who were Romans. But as Greek speakers, they are going to value the old Greek writings. They're going to value Homer. They're going to value a bunch of the old philosophers and geometricians, and all of these important thinkers of the ancient Greeks are going to be seen as part of this Byzantine heritage as much as the Roman thinkers will have been. So we'll see Homer and Plato, Thucydides, the historian, these are all going to be part of this new Byzantine empire. They're not going to be that interested in Aristotle, and they're certainly not going to be that interested in the old scientific, and mathematical traditions. They're seen as somewhat suspect. So they're going to preserve these things. How do you preserve them? You teach them, you keep them around, and you make copies. Lots of copies keep stuff safe. By preserving them, you're making copies. In the course of making copies, you're choosing which to keep and which not to keep. So you just let something go away by not making a copy of it. And eventually, it simply rots away. Also, during the copying process, you can very easily change the text. And that's what's going to happen to some of these old classics, is that the text is going to be changed, edited for consumption. However, we'll find in the Byzantine Empire, education will be valued. People will be interested in becoming literate, men and women. Upper class women will be not only educated, but they will be mingling with males. We're going to see kind of a little bit of erosion of these strict divisions between men and women that the hyper masculine atmosphere of the old Roman Empire had. And we're going to see men and women mixing together a little bit more. Also, female physicians is going to be something that the Byzantine Empire is known for. And for those of us who have to have gynecological exams every so often, having a female physician is, for some of us, preferred. Anyway, so female physicians, that's going to be a, a, a big part of this new tradition. So, one of the innovations, however, will be architecture, because it's kind of hard to be political with architecture. Starting under Justinian, we're going to see the building of the Hagia Sophia, which is the Church of Holy Wisdom. This is one of the great cathedrals or churches in the Western world. Now, it symbolized the Christian religion and holy knowledge. It does that by having a plain exterior and a magnificent interior. Absolutely gorgeous interior, but the exterior is plain. Now you can see by the picture on the screen, there are 4 tall pointed towers. Those are not in the original design. Those are minarets. Those will be added onto the Church of Hagia Sophia after 1453, when the Ottoman Turks take over Constantinople, change the name to Istanbul, and turn the Church of Hagia Sophia into a mosque. So those minarets were not there initially. So you have to, if you're trying to think about them, about this church originally, you kind of have to erase those. But the exterior is plain and the interior is filled with mosaics, gold leaf, and marble columns. Now, I don't know if you know anything about gold leaf, it's real gold. Gold is a very soft metal, and it can be hammered extremely thin, so thin that you can see through it. Since it's been the 50th anniversary of the moonwalk, you sometimes saw colored pictures of the astronauts, and they have kind of this gold face shield. It's gold colored. It's actually not gold colored. It's actual gold, that it was worked into the visor because it was one thing that worked very well to block out the blinding sunlight. So, but gold leaf, not hammered quite that thin, hammered to the thinness of toilet paper. Do you all have toilet paper? I hope so. Anyway, because you might have to use gold leaf. No. So gold leaf is very fragile, very light, very airy, and you can paint glue onto a surface and then put the gold leaf on it and then let the glue dry, and then you can brush off any part of the surface it wasn't glued on, but that means you get gold all over your workshop. Anyway, so when you see gold in these images of the Hagia Sophia, it's really gold. It might only be very, very thin, but it is still real gold. And this was, at the time, one of the biggest buildings in the world. Also, instead of being big on the outside like the pyramids, this was big on the inside. That was what was so influential about it. It had this construction of these arches, the Roman arches stacked upon arches, holding each other up. And you can see how tall this building is. The image on the left is an actual photograph. The image on the right is actually a painting done in the early 19th century. This building is now a museum, but you can see the influences of history. You can see the Byzantine artwork, but you can also see a couple of shields in the left-hand image with Arabic script, and those were put in place when the building was repurposed to be a mosque. So it's still there. It's a museum. It's worthy of a visit, I am told. I really want to go there one of these days. But people visited it from all over the world. It was particularly spectacular for its time, and still remains that way. But I want to leave you with a couple of images, a couple of symbols that were important to the Byzantine Empire. The first one is the chi and rho, what looks like a P and X to us, but those are the Greek letters chi and rho, the first two letters of Christ, which is one of the ancient symbols that was used by the early Christians. That will be an important symbol that we will see aligned with the Byzantine Church. The other symbol, though, the double-headed eagle, sear that into your memory, because that image is going to pop up in some of the weirdest places you can possibly imagine. When the Roman Republic needed an emblem, they used the eagle, the aquila. And the Roman legion standards, many of them had big gold aquila on them. So it was an important Roman symbol. When Diocletian spread the Roman Empire into two parts, east and west, they kept the eagle, but they gave it a separate head, one looking east, one looking west. And the Byzantine Empire adopted this as one of their important symbols. So the double-headed eagle always means the Roman Empire, which is why when you see it pop up in places, pay attention, because what the people who are using the symbols are telling you is that they consider themselves the Roman Empire.
Russians?
Yeah, which is why when you see it on the Russian president's flag, Vladimir Putin's flag, it's on there. It becomes one of the symbols of the Tsars. But I will talk about that in a later lecture. So just remember that symbol. So going on to the next group we're going to talk about, the next civilization. For some of you, you know this very well, and this will be kindergarten stuff for you. Please be patient. There's a lot of your fellow students who might not know as much as you do about Islam. And so hopefully we can kind of get everybody on the same track. I am not talking about religion, either Christian or Jewish or Islamic or any other religion we've talked about in this class, to change anyone's mind, to convince you in any way. I am merely putting it in historical context so that you can see where all this fits in. Because maybe you've studied this as a religion, but now we can look at it as part of our history and part of these traditions that we have. So Islam starts on the Arabian Peninsula. This was desert. This was a place nobody went. The Fertile Crescent, that's why it was a crescent. It went over this desert. The Persians ignored this desert. Alexander the Great ignored this desert for the most part. The Romans pretty much ignored this desert. There was one group of people who were totally comfortable in it, and those were the Arabs. Because they didn't have traditions of growing that much food or anything, they had traditions of travel. Only they could make it across that peninsula, that amazing desert, safely. And so they created trade caravans. They matched these trade caravans with the sailing that they did out of the southern Arabian Peninsula. They went to India, they went to China, they went to the northeastern part of Africa. And so they had this trading tradition, and it was tied to all of the other further eastern civilizations. They were what we call a tribal society. They lived in a little bit larger family units, and they identified with these family units. They had these important trade networks, of which Mecca, the city of Mecca, was already part of this trade network. It also had a shrine because before the coming of Muhammad, the Arabs were polytheists and they kept statues of their gods in this shrine called the Kaaba, which is in Mecca. And Mecca was ruled over by one of the tribal societies known as the Quraysh. And they had control of Mecca and the shrine and the money that came into it from the pilgrimages of Arabs coming to visit this shrine. So that's going to change drastically with the life of Muhammad. He was born in Mecca of the Quraysh family, but he was orphaned early and he married the widow of a rich trader. So he was in the trading business and he was well off. He was fairly wealthy. In 610 CE, he will have a religious epiphany. He will become monotheistic. He will become convinced that there is no God but Allah. He will become a uncompromising monotheist, and he will be known as the prophet. There is nothing divine about Muhammad to the Muslims, but he is the prophet, the last and greatest prophet, meaning that he will speak of his revelations about Allah. He is going to try to convert the rest of the Quraysh in Mecca to monotheism, and he will not be successful. He will, in fact, leave Mecca for a city known as Yathrib. We know it now as Medina, in a movement that is known as the Hijra in 622 CE. 622 CE becomes the zero date for the Muslim calendar. Just as the Romans put their zero date with the founding of the city of Rome, the Hebrews have their zero date, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, all of the civilizations had their own zero date. Well, the Islamic zero date is 622. They also organize their calendar as a lunar calendar. So it's a cycle every 28 days rather than 30 to 31, which is why Ramadan, one of their most important observances, has to happen at a particular time, but it always happens at a different month. So that's why it's an observance that moves. So you always have to pay very close attention to when it starts because it's based on the phases of the moon. So in Medina, Muhammad is going to organize a religious community with himself as the head, not just of the religious community, but the head of the military that's there and the head of the government arm. He's going to have his own small government. So he's going to be more than just a religious prophet. He will be a military leader and he will be a governor, a leader of his people. And they will spend time raiding the Quraysh caravans, trying to convince them to become monotheists. They eventually will agree in 630, and Muhammad will enter Mecca in our year 630 and create this new religious tradition. Muhammad's revelations will be in the book known as the Quran. Islam means submission to the will of Allah. When we're talking about things, we use the word Islamic or Islam. When we're talking about people, they are Muslims. So you wouldn't call a thing a Muslim thing. People are Muslims. but items identified with the Islamic faith are Islamic. So the uncompromising monotheism of Muhammad insists that there is no other divinity other than Allah, other than God. Now, this Allah is the same God of the Hebrew tradition and of the Christian tradition. Muhammad's coming much later than either of those traditions. The other two traditions are already set, but the works of the Quran go back to Abraham. And Abraham is seen as the true beginnings of these three monotheistic religions. What differs Islam from Christianity is that Muslims see Jesus not as a divine figure, as the Christians think, but as a prophet, like Muhammad. Muhammad is the later prophet that comes along. So the teachings of the Quran are vital, and that what it teaches are rituals and practices to ensure salvation. Now, there are other books called Hadith, but the Quran takes precedence because it is linked to Muhammad. In Islam, there are 5 basic observances that are necessary for salvation. We call them the 5 pillars of Islam: submission to the will of Allah, frequent prayer, 5 times a day, generally speaking. Ritual fasting, now that's the observance of Ramadan, an entire month where all observant Muslims go without eating, drinking, sex, or smoking from sunup to sundown. I've had taught summer classes in the evening during the month of Ramadan. And so I always made sure with my students, when is sunset? Okay, we'll take a break 5 minutes before, because those days are so much longer that it is a very important observance for them. Giving of alms, the 4th pillar of Islam, is mandatory. It's not just a good idea. You are to give alms to the poor. And if you are able, financially and physically, an annual pilgrimage to Mecca. You don't have to go every year. Most people go once in their lifetime. It's called the Hajj, in which they and millions of other Muslims from throughout the world gather to perform various rituals. And I've read articles of very westernized Muslims here in the United States who go on the Hajj, and they say it's life-changing for them to be with other Muslims from all over the world, and everyone dresses in a particular ritualized outfit, so no one looks better than the other person, and it's a very important part of their lives. The Muslims do not have priests. They have community leaders or imams. They don't have priests, sacraments, or prescribed liturgy. That's very important. They also want to engage in the work of conversion. They aspire to unite the entire world with a shared faith. So that's kind of a few moments on Islam, so that we're all on the same understanding of the faith itself. Now, there's a couple of differences in the Islamic faith, and that happens after the death of Muhammad. There will be a fight as to who should take control, because remember, Muhammad was both a military leader, a religious leader, and a community government leader. So who took over was not a question of who was the Pontifex Maximus, who was the chief priest, but who led the community. They're tied very closely together. And this division is known as the Shiite and Sunni Schism. The Shiites are the minority party. There are fewer of them, that they insisted that only certain descendants of Ali and Fatima should be ruling this community. And they did not accept certain customs. Most of the Shiites live in Iran, with handfuls, very small minorities around the world, but most of them are in Iran. Sunnis, of course, are the majority of Muslims, and they, because they are the majority, have control over places like Mecca. The understanding the Shiite-Sunni Schism is important to understand what's happening in the Middle East right now. It's important to understand why Saudi Arabia, which is Sunni, and Wahhabi are aligning against Iran, which is Shiite. That's how strong, they're both Islamic, but that's how strong this division is. So this division cannot be ignored when we're talking about Muslims either in history or today. Islam is going to be an expansive empire. It's going to grow insanely fast. It's going to start in the Arabian Peninsula, and yet it's going to move out. This is where the green is where Muslims were in 632 at the death of Muhammad. The orange is, of course, the Byzantine Empire. They're going to add, within 30 years, all of this red area. This is area that the Byzantine Empire and the Persians had tried to rule, and they will be taken over by the Islamic dynasties, who will offer less taxes. They will offer a more, what's the term I'm looking for? Tolerant society, because they're not going to insist everyone becomes Muslim. By 750, we see Islam has expanded to Spain, which they call Al-Andalus, to North Africa, all the way across most of the Middle East and into India. So this is a very large expansion in a very short period of time. That's kind of why the textbook talks about how the Islamic dynasties acted like the Roman Empire with this expansive sort of movement out. So there's going to be two separate main dynasties is in the Islamic world, and that is the Umayyad and the Abbasid. The Umayyads are going to come first. They're going to take Syria, put their capital in Damascus, and they will be spreading west. They'll head into Egypt, they'll head into North Africa. This is after they failed to take Constantinople. They won't be successful. Not because they didn't try. They will try very hard. But we'll see them moving west into places like Spain. Now, they'll gain a foothold in Spain in 711, and they will stay there for 700 years and create their own society. The image on the screen is one of the castles, fortresses built by one of the Umayyad leaders. It is in Toledo, Spain. And it exemplifies how far the Islamic dynasties went. The Abbasids are going to come a little bit later. They're going to force the Umayyad dynasties out of Syria, out of the Middle East, out of parts of North Africa, but they're going to be interested in going east. They're going to go to the old Mesopotamian areas between the Tigris and Euphrates River and take over the city of Babylon and change its name to Baghdad. And so that's going to be the Abbasid capital. They're going to, however, while they're there, adopt certain Persian styles. So artistically, they are very different from the Umayyad dynasties, and certainly from the Christians in the area. In fact, if you want to get some thoughts about what their artwork is like, you can think of Aladdin. Those onion domes, those sinewy onion domes and towers and that beautiful architecture. That's all Abbasid design. In fact, the story that the main storybook that Aladdin came from was called the Arabian Nights, or the 1001 Arabian Nights. It's a story of a woman whose, I believe, her husband is the ruler. Her name is Scheherazade, and he wants to execute her, but she starts telling him stories and doesn't tell him the end of the story, but it's time for him to go to bed. And so he'll say, okay, I'll let you live another day if you'll finish up this story. And so she starts finishing that story, but she goes into the next story. So that's why it's 1001 Arabian Nights, but it includes the tales of Sinbad and Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, and of course, Aladdin. But I don't mean to denigrate this amazing culture by referencing a Disney cartoon, because it was one of the most impressive cultures of the time as far as intellectual movement. A lot of that Greek mathematics and Greek philosophical work, that's going to work its way into the Abbasid and the Umayyad cultures. They're going to take it up. They're going to build what's called the House of Knowledge, and under the leadership of an intellectual by the name of Harun al-Rashid, they will be creating what is essentially a university system and teaching geometry and teaching mathematics and forming their own set of mathematics. You've probably heard of it, algebra. They're going to become the repository for math, for science, for learning. Now, I talked about the Umayyad and the Abbasids fought. They fought physically, wars. Who's going to take over what area? But they also fought culturally to try to outdo each other in terms of culture. For example, literature. Because of the Islamic injunction against graven images, we see a growth, an expansion of literature, of poetry, of calligraphy, and of architecture that will characterize this time, and libraries. Libraries, unlike what the rest of Europe understood as a library. In a time when monasteries would have a few hundred books at best, the library at Cordoba in Spain had 400,000 volumes. That's a respectable library in modern times. So they tried to attract the smartest and the best and educated them. And so the Umayyad and the Abbasid dynasties are going to be these strongholds of innovation and education and medicine and all this. And I'll talk about them a little bit later. But they're still going to keep the traditions, the ancient Arabic traditions of the trade caravans. They're going to master the sea routes as well. And they're going to have important industries. In Baghdad, we'll see glassware and jewelry and pottery, and they'll be importing silk. So they'll be making things out of silk from Chinese silk. The Umayyads, especially in Morocco and Spain, they'll be known for leatherworking. And of course, the city of Toledo, which will be home of sword making.
It's actually Cordoba, not Toledo.
Oh, no. Well, Cordoba, Toledo is where they build swords. If you go back to my slide, I've got the sword store that we saw in Toledo. Anyway, okay. Let me go on a little bit more. So Toledo, they had swords. There's the address. If you sword store, okay, the D&D geek in me went absolutely crazy going into this store. I want one of everything. It was so cool. Anyway, but you can order these things online as well. But in Cordoba, can we go back to the images you had? In Cordoba and in Granada, where the Alhambra is, Granada had the secret to porcelain. Porcelain tiles was what they decorated their interiors with. And porcelain tiles, to people who were only used to wattle and daub and thatch and wood and stone, to see a wall of elegant, beautiful porcelain tiles and beautiful carvings. This is the kind of fantasy world that the Umayyads developed in Spain. And so they were very, very different than everyone in Europe. But the one recipe they had that these different Islamic dynasties had, that will be the game changer, aside from all the nifty stuff. Paper. They will get the recipe for paper from the Chinese, and they will use the paper to build their libraries and to keep records. When paper becomes cheaper, you can keep records. You're not dealing with wax tablets or chiseling things in stone or writing on vellum, which was extraordinarily expensive. You've got cheap paper. And all of a sudden that changes things. You can make notes to yourself. That's going to be a huge difference. So what do I mean by paper? Can we go back to the slide?
Mm-hmm. Oh.
What the Europeans and the Byzantines were using was called vellum. It's calf skin or goat skin or sheep skin. The fur is all shaved off, it's stretched, it's tan, and it makes for an extraordinarily durable substrate to write on. And if you make a mistake, you can just scrape it off with a knife. But it's expensive. Imagine the size of a calf. Calves are not very big. Imagine a large, elegant, illustrated Bible. You're looking at 3,000 calves to go into one book. Mind-blowing. The cost of this book, that was one of the reasons why the book was so expensive. However, vellum lasts a long time. It's really tough. It's leather. It's a very fine leather. It's not exactly leather. And bookworms love it. Oof. Anyway, but paper, which is what the Islamic dynasties created. Paper is something that is, you can throw it away, you can use it, you don't have to reuse it, you don't have to worry about it's so expensive you can't get rid of it. Vellum was so expensive that they oftentimes washed the old ink off of it and rewrote on it. And we thought the works that they had done that were lost, except in modern science, we found out that the ink that they had used generally had iron. It consisted partly of iron, and so we can go through old vellum sheets that had been washed and something else rewritten on them, and we can find what was actually on it. So yeah, that's the good thing about vellum. But paper is an extremely useful thing. Once we have paper, then we can start really making books and printing in a big way. So I want to talk a little bit, get you started into what was happening in Europe. Normally around 8:15, we take a break. So what I'd like to do is talk for a few more minutes, and then maybe take a break because I got to drink something, and then I'll come back. This lecture is both being recorded tonight, but I have also recorded this lecture on video. I believe it's already up on Canvas. So you can watch the last third of this lecture. So I'm not going to keep you that late. I'm forcing you to sit here and watch this for whatever, and you can't speed it up. That's no fun. It's much more fun when you can speed it up and I sound more like a chipmunk than I normally do. Anyway, so I'm going to talk for a little bit more. We'll take a quick break, and then I'll talk to you about the assignment that I've put up lately. All right. So Northwestern Europe, this is aside from the Byzantines and the Islamic dynasties. These are people who had basically watched the veneer of Roman civilization crumble as different groups came in, barbarian groups came in, took over places with a lot of violence. So they're broken with that veneer of civilization we think of as Rome. And they're down to subsistence farming for the most part. There's not a lot of writing books. There's not a lot of art or culture for a brief while. They have to reconstruct their civilization. And this image is my ideal of what Northwestern Europe was like at this time. This is the island of Saint-Michel. It's on the northern coast of France. It's an island at high tide. At low tide, there's enough of a sandbar revealed so there's a road there. So you can drive out to it at low tide at certain times, but once the tide comes in, it's an island that's way out in the bay. You can't get to it except by boat, and you can see it's ringed with wall after wall. There's a city on the inside, and of course it's topped by this magnificent church that's part of a monastery. And that, in a microcosm, is the early medieval period. This Europe trying to find its way. That's kind of why older historians characterized it as the Dark Ages, but not quite. I don't buy into that. So one of the reasons it wasn't dark were the monasteries. Monasticism is going to grow throughout Europe. Various different monastic houses, and they were like franchises. There were two main types early on. Later, they're going to add a couple more, and then a couple more. So they're different groups. But mainly, they're going out into rural areas, and they're setting up these monasteries out in the countryside, and they're either staying away from everyone or doing good works. It depended on the various monastery. They had very close relationships with the local powerful families Oftentimes, you would see the wives or the widows or members of powerful families put into these monasteries. Um, and they would become very much diplomats and peacekeepers and people keeping all of the information, because most of the time, in most of the areas they're in, they're the only literate people. Everyone else basically is illiterate. That will change in a couple hundred years, but they're going to be in these communities way out in the rural areas. They're going to Christianize the pagans out in the countryside, but they will also be their own little self-sufficient um, centers of thoughtfulness, of prayer. They grow their own food oftentimes. They keep to themselves. They have vows of celibacy and poverty and sometimes silence. Um, so they're usually very restful places. But one of the big jobs that they do is copying books to try to keep these things up to date. They don't want these books to go away. And in fact, the illustration on this slide is a great illustration of a monk. He's at his writing table. The writing table is always slanted. He's got a ruler in his hand. In his left hand, he's got a ruler. But in his right hand, he's got a little knife. That's a pen knife. I know that, sometimes men have knives that fold up, and you put them in their pockets. They call them pen knives. Well, that's where we get the term. These were not clasp knives. These were blades on a stick, but they were curved. You see that blade is very curved in his hand. The inside part of the curve was the sharpened part, because that's what they used to make the quills from. That was just the right shape to shave down and create the nibs on the quills of the goose feathers that they used to write with. Feathers are hollow, so you created this nib and you dipped it in the ink, and the vacuum action would suck the ink up into the quill, so you had, a good amount of ink to write with. But you see, he's holding it backwards. He is inscribing lines so that he can mark where to write. If you look at handwritten illuminated manuscripts, as they're called, very closely, kind of had to tip them. Oftentimes you can see these lines, the exact sign of lines that this guy is making on the vellum. Vellum is so you can inscribe that line and it's going to stay there for quite some time, or at least long enough to do the painting and do the writing. Anyway, and this is, of course, I love this slide because it's totally meta, because this is a monk inscribing an illuminated manuscript inside the initial letter of an illuminated manuscript. Anyway, meta. Women in monastic life. This was an important factor in the Middle Ages, because the women in abbeys and convents, as they were called, they also took vows of celibacy, poverty, and sometimes of silence. But no men were allowed in these convents, which meant to be self-sufficient, they had to educate themselves, set up their own administration, and run their lives. Women in convents had a much more prestigious and erudite and empowered place than many of the women outside of the abbey, outside of the convent. So to be a celibate nun might seem like to be in prison, but really they had their own advocacy and agency for themselves, because they had to do it all themselves. So these monasteries are really the repositories for the important stuff intellectually and spiritually that are happening in Europe at this time. And I'm going to take a break there. If we can take a 5-minute break and grab something to eat or whatever, and I'll get some hot water in me, and we'll see you in a few minutes.
I don't think I can shut off your microphone. Oh, wait. I think I just did. You want me to run up and get you anything?
Mm-mm.
Say, what? Hello? 1, 2. Say something.
Audio check, 1, 2. Let's go. All right. We've, as I said, the rest of this lecture, you can find it on the video. I've got the URL, I believe, posted. I'll make sure it's posted on the Chapter 7 module so that you can see the rest of it. But I want to talk to you for a little bit about the assignment coming up. And that's going to be your assignment on a close reading of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which is a very famous medieval poem, was written a little bit before 1400. You will find where you see the assignment on the Canterbury Tales, you'll see that I've got a video that Jerry and I made about Chaucer and about the tales, so you can kind of see where it was done and find out more about the poem itself, because it's kind of a long poem. The part I'm asking you to read is the general prologue. Chaucer describes going on a pilgrimage to the city of Canterbury. And in this general prologue, you meet all of the characters. There are 29 separate characters in this poem. And he describes almost each of these characters in detail, talking about what they're wearing, talking about their jobs. Some of them even gives names to, talking about what horses they're riding. But as you read this, you're going to notice a couple of things. Number one, you're going to find a lot of terms that you probably don't understand. That's okay. I'm expecting that. But also, you're going to find that the descriptions that Chaucer gives are really super detailed. And part of that is because the people he is writing for are the people of his time, who understood all of these terms that we don't, because the terms have changed, or maybe they've fallen entirely out of use. And so the idea behind this assignment is to have you read the general prologue. You're not going to understand everything. I know that. Go through and read it. And then I've got a sign-up sheet, and I want you to pick one of the phrases on the sign-up sheet. You will see that there is a phrase and there's a number. You'll see also on the general prologue that I've given you there are numbers. That's the line number. So you can find the phrase in terms of the line number. I didn't number every line because that would have taken me forever. Yeah, you can see the line number there. So go dig into the general prologue, find a phrase. Don't settle for the first one, because I want to cover as many of these phrases as we can as a class. So each person gets a phrase. And then they're going to try to decipher that phrase and understand it, not as we understand it today, or understand it as a dictionary might give us the modern definition, but understand it as Chaucer and his friends would understand it, and his readers would understand it. And that's going to take some research. And that's what this paper is about. So sign up for a phrase, and I'll have to go through all of these sign-up sheets and get everybody's name in there. There's a discussion, and there's a thread, so you can sign up for things, so you'll be able to see what other people have signed up for. So find something other people haven't signed up for. Choose two, your first choice and your second choice, and that way, hopefully, we won't have too many more. Anyway, so start researching what that term is. There's going to be words in that phrase you don't understand. If I just gave you the word, it would be too confusing. That's why I gave you an entire phrase, so you see it in the context of that line. So you're going to have to look at what part of the poem it is, who it's describing, and get a feel for it. Just because close reading is not about just knowing all the words. Close reading is understanding the context as a whole, understanding more about the document. So this is, you'll need to look up 2 different articles for the, box in a box. 2 different articles for your definition. One can be a source on the internet, or whatever, but the other source has to be a scholarly journal. It has to come from the NOVA database. Now, I have got videos on how to search the database and how to understand it. When we get together next week, I can give you more information, or I can give you some more information how to do that here. But the project that you'll be doing should be a 2 to 3 page essay where you will define your phrase, say, I have found that it, means this. Describe the first article that you used and describe the second article that you used. And you might find that they're very different. But I'm giving you tools inside this assignment for checklists that you can go through and analyze those articles. What were their sources? Who wrote them? Is the person who wrote them qualified to make this judgment? You'll see on the checklists the things that you can look for. This part of this assignment is to get used to analyzing the sources of your information so that when people give you some piece of information, and I don't care what it is, your first reaction should be, how do you know that? What's your source? And then go look it up. Don't take their word for it. And so I want you to get this idea through this assignment of there are some sources that are, pretty good. They'll get you part way. And there are other sources that are really going to give you a expertise on the subject that other people don't have. So this assignment, I want you to dig into this, really deeply and think about this word and this phrase and try to be Chaucer's original audience and try to understand at least your little phrase like they did. And so hopefully we build this up with everybody working on it, and we will have a far better understanding if we were to reread this poem than we would initially reading it. So I hope that's helpful. Remember, I've changed my policies. Between anything that you is due or you have submitted between the dates of March 1st and April 4th, I will not have a late penalty. So if you need a little bit of extra time to work on this, because it's due the end of March, and this is like gotten in the way, this whole self-isolation thing. So you can have a little bit of extra time to work on it. I'm going to see if I can hold like some Zoom workshops so that you can come in and talk. As always, I am happy to take your emails, to look over rough drafts, anything that you might want to share with me and say, hey, is this right? When we're, and, I'll help you, be happy to help you that way. So look at all of those things that I've put up in this module to help you better understand it. So don't panic right away. Let me, at this moment, do a little bit of a discussion for you about databases and why they're so important, and what they actually are. When I was in high school, we did not have databases. We had these giant blue and green books called the indexes. And they were the table of contents arranged by date and arranged by subject of journals. And you had to figure out what the date was or what the subject was, and it took you forever to search because you're going through these giant books looking for it. So the process of looking through databases online, and this is all going to be still available online, is so much better. And modern scientists use articles to get their point across very quickly. And so if you, when you transfer to a four-year university and you can pull up these articles in scholarly journals and know how to use them, you will look like a sophisticated student when you get to the four-year university. So this is, I think, one of the more crucial skills you can have coming out of Nova, coming out of my class. So think of this process as looking in containers. And it's like those Russian nesting dolls. You're getting to smaller and smaller and smaller dolls, and they all fit inside of each other. So the big overarching box container is the library. And you are paying tuition that's going to the library. So use it. You've already paid for it. So there's a letter below that. And this is databases. And there's a lot of them. Many, 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 many databases. ProQuest, JSTOR, Project Muse, etc. There's a lot of them. When you start looking in the library catalog under articles, you're going to see all of these. For this assignment, the two ones that you might have the best luck with are called JSTOR and Project Muse. M-U-S-E. Okay. What the databases do is hold a bunch of journals. These are not publishers. They are corporations that buy buy up journals and the rights to publish these journals. And so what you're searching for in each of these is journals. And ProQuest has a bunch, and JSTOR has a bunch, and Project Muse has a bunch. Hint, there are 3 separate journals in Project Muse that deal with nothing but Chaucer and the Middle Ages literature. So that's why I say go to Project Muse, and you can find it under the databases. If you look under databases by alphabetical order, go to the P's. Project Muse is right there. So these are journals. Now, the database is just the searchable part. If you're working up your paper and you say, I found this in JSTOR, that's not very meaningful to me as the reader, because these are private companies. They buy and sell these journals. You might find that ProQuest has the journal that you're looking for, but it only has the dates from 1874 to 1903. And then the rights to that journal was purchased by Project Muse, and they have 1903 to present. So the database is just a repository, and things change within the database. The layer you want to get to is the journals. And these are the scholarly magazines that have the articles in them. It is at this level that you see peer review. And I'll talk about peer review in a second. It is at this level that experts write. They're writing for these journals. And then in the journals, you have articles. This is the level right here, the article level that you want to be looking at. That's what you're going to be looking for. And these articles are written by experts, generally if they're peer-reviewed. And so it is the expertise of the author of the article that you should be addressing in your paper. Don't say, this article says. Articles are inanimate objects, they don't talk. But the writer of the article says. The writer is doing all the work. The article's not doing any work. So think of the article, and there are thousands of these. If you're searching terms, you go to the database, you search terms, you're going to find what they call hits. Thousands of them, tens of thousands of them. And those will be the articles in the journals. And you're just going to have to go through and find what is the most applicable. So be thinking about this hierarchy. The library, of course, is what you're using. The database is the collection of journals. The journals is what you're looking for, and the articles in the journal is what you want to find. So that's the important part. Once you get the article, though, if you look on the checklists I put in the module, you're going to find something important. You're not only going to find out about looking at the expertise of this journal writer, you're going to look for his sources, or her sources, sorry. The authors are going to have sources that they use. And that's how you tell a good article from a bad article sometimes. Do they use good sources? Are they using primary documents or secondary sources or tertiary sources or no sources at all, i.e. making it up? So these are all very critical points that you want to think about in your articles. Now, so you got that, all right? I'm going to erase it. Okay, peer review. Why is that important? You all know what I call the first scientific method. You learned this in high school biology, probably. Basically goes observation, then you'd make a hypothesis, and then you write up an experiment, to test the hypothesis, whether it's right or wrong. You have your conclusions, and then you can start working up a theory once you make it all through this. So that's the initial scientific method. You know this. This is what is important, and it's important to keep notes on all of this and everything. But this is not the end. This is only halfway through the scientific method. What you want to know about is, how do you get the theory out? That's publishing. Okay? That's where the journals come in. Because you've come to your conclusions, what you do is write an article. You write up an article, you state your conclusions, it tells you everything that you've done, outlines your methodology, etc. Right? Then you send it to a journal. Maybe it's a prestigious journal in your field, something that you've read a lot of, or you would really like to get published because you want to get this information out. Because journals are published more often than books. This is how science is done now. Very few scientists write books. They mainly write journal articles to get this information out as quickly as possible. So the article goes to the journal editor. The editor might not be an expert in the field that you're writing about, because some of this is very high-level stuff. So what the journal editor does is he has a stable of experts. He's got reviewers. They're also known as readers. Jokingly called Reader 1 and Reader 2. These are people who are experts in the field. These are people who will understand what you are doing. And their job is to take your article, they've stripped your name off of it as the article author, and it's sent to these people. You do not know who these people are. This is all done blind. These are the peer reviewers. Okay, so these are two experts who know the field that the editors picked to read your article. They're going to take your article, look through it, and then they're going to send it back to the editor. And they're going to say either publish, it's good, or they're going to say return and revise. Return and revise, meaning that this looks good, but there are a few things that are unclear. Have the author go back and look through it, rewrite it, and put it in again. Or they can say reject. So publish, return and revise, or reject. And oftentimes they'll write up a lengthy write-up, review, tell you where they think it was wrong, tell you what they think is good about it, etc., etc. So depending on what the reviewers say, it's either going to be published, or sent back to you for rewriting, or rejected out of hand. Once it's published in the journal, then the experiment, the methodology, and the conclusions are out there for everyone to read, and maybe redo the experiment, or maybe look through it to see if it's good, or maybe criticize it. But that's the fastest and most accurate way of getting that message out to make sure that it's gone through this process. Not everything goes through this process. A lot of journal articles about literature do not go through this process. This is one that's very much for science. History, some journals do it, some journals do not. So if you make it through this process, you have done something incredibly special. And when this process is skipped, or little bits and pieces of it are left out, then you're in for a problem, a big problem. Can I tell you what one of those problems was? Okay. Back in the early 1990s, I'm wrestling with my whiteboard. Back in the early 1990s, a doctor by the name of Andrew Wakefield wrote an article about an experiment. He's a medical doctor, wrote an article about an experiment that he had done. And he had a buddy who was the editor of The Lancet, which is the Great Britain's, the United Kingdom's most prestigious medical journal, The Lancet. Everything in there is considered top-notch research. And Andrew Wakefield wrote up his article, and his buddy published it without going through any of these steps. He just published it. Okay? The point of this article was that certain vaccines given to small children cause autism. You probably know where I'm going with this. This article outlines his experiment, talks about his how he did this study, and talks about his conclusion. And he definitely concluded this vaccine causes autism. Well, a whole bunch of other doctors read that article and said, wait a minute. And they started tearing it apart. They looked at his methodology and said, you only tested 30 kids who had autism. You only tested 30 kids who had autism who had this vaccine. There was no control group of kids who had autism and didn't get the vaccine, or kids who had gotten the vaccine and didn't have autism. So no control group, no double-blind testing, extraordinarily small, ridiculously small set of subjects. 30 is not a scientific subject. That's incredibly small to make this kind of drastic conclusion. They started digging into this doctor's background, Andrew Wakefield's background, and they found out that he was a paid consultant for a company that made a vaccine that was in competition with the vaccine he studied in his research. In other words, he was being paid to find reasons why this other vaccine was no good. And he came up with a study that said this vaccine causes autism. But as soon as other doctors started complaining, the board of directors of The Lancet looked at it and said, you're right, we were wrong to publish it. They fired the editor, they withdrew the article, they printed a long retraction. Eventually, Andrew Wakefield lost his license to practice medicine in the United Kingdom. But it was too late, because that article is one of the starting points of the anti-vaccine movement. That whole vaccines cause autism, and the scientific study they pointed to is a discredited scientific study. It's been thrown out. But you cannot get rid of anti-vaxxers. And that's the danger of printing something important Scientifically, that doesn't go through the process. A lot of people got in very big trouble for it, but the horse is out of the barn. This is the kind of chaos that not following the process causes. So anyway, I have friends who are research scientists, and I promised them I would tell you the story and make sure you understand. All of my classes understand how important peer review and checking your sources are, because it's this kind of problem that can be a real problem. In history, no one's going to say, "Oh, well, you said the wrong thing about Pearl Harbor, therefore, something else has happened." History doesn't quite work that way. We're not scientific, hardly. We are informed by the scientific method, as we like to say. But I hope that long rambling story helps you understand, what this process is, why peer review is important, etc. Anyway, I don't know if you have any more questions. You're welcome to if you're typing, you're welcome to type it in. If you aren't signed in, you're welcome to go ahead and send them to me by email. But is this the continuation of the course? Yes, we're going to be continuing to do this, Naveed. The college has said that they will review the conditions and the recommendations of the Center for Disease Control and see what they recommend around March 27th. Then they will decide if the course is going to continue online, all the courses at Nova online, or if they're going to go back in the classroom. Now, they closed down the college so that we instructors, if we needed to, could go in and take training on Zoom and on other things. And as it turned out, one of the instructors that went into the Manassas campus tested positive for COVID-19. So they have had to shut down the entire Manassas campus to clean it, to sanitize it. So if it can happen that quickly, now what is it going to be like in 2 weeks? So I won't guarantee that we'll ever get a chance to meet face to face again this semester. I hope we do, because I have enjoyed having you all here, and I would much rather be in class than in my basement studio. Although I do have snacks. Anyway, so I can't guarantee what's going to be happening. All I can ask you to do is keep an eye on Canvas. If anything drastic happens, I will email you. Keep your eyes on the Nova website, because they've got information. There's lots of information that they have put on there on student services. The computer lab in Waddell Hall will stay open for students, but everything else is closed down. Only certain personnel are allowed on the rest of the campus. So that's all I can tell you right now. I will continue to watch my email, keep you informed, try to keep up with all this work. I'm having to redo and rethink all my syllabi because of this. It's been absolutely no fun. I'm going to start a class tomorrow morning, and that we haven't met yet, so we have 8 weeks. It's going to be so I want to do everything I can to help you get through this. If you have recommendations, I will be more than happy to get them. I don't know if YouTube is the best vehicle for it, but I sent out that survey, and most of the answers I got almost no one had ever used Zoom, which is the program on Canvas. And to do Zoom, you have to download certain software. And I didn't want to force you to do that. I felt like we're already used to YouTube. We can get that out there, and it's a good platform for that. And I'm keeping this private, generally speaking. I'm gonna we'll be unlisting it so that you will have access to it. But I don't want the general public to. Anyway, my voice is giving out. I appreciate you being here.
Video?
Pardon?
How do they find the rest of chapter 7?
Oh, the rest of chapter 7 is, it should be on the module. If you go into Canvas, go into the module for the early Middle Ages, chapters 7 and 8, and it should be there. If it's not there, I will make sure that it is there by the end of the evening, so you'll have it then. I appreciate all of you being here. This is fun, but I'd much rather be in the classroom being with you guys. Thank you so much for being here. Take care. Bye-bye. Oh.
Are you going to talk about the reign of Charlemagne?
Yes, I see.
You want to go ahead and answer that question real quick? Your mic is still open. So you can
Naveed, if you're still there, if you haven't turned off, the answer to your question, are you going to talk about the reign of Charlemagne? I cover that on the video lecture that's already recorded, and I do a little bit longer talking about it than I would tonight. So yes, Charlemagne is on there, and so you will be able to see that on the already recorded video. Sorry to have to break this up like this, but I don't want to force you guys to sit here for that much longer, because it's another quite a bit of discussion after that. And then we got the Vikings. Yay. Okay. Anyway, thank you, Brian. The I can't think of anything else. Shoot me an email. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Wash your hands.
Wash your hands a lot.
Bye-bye.